to be here today. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, Paving the Way to More Inclusive User Research. We're really excited to be sharing this today because it's an important day for us here at Keyline. We'll talk a little bit about what we've done over the last year, but I'll go ahead and move to introductions here. My name is Anya Rodriguez, and I'm the founder and CEO of Keyline Interactive. I'm a first generation Cuban American. I promise to try to talk slow. I know that I see some familiar faces, clients on this call who know that that was something that I worked through very much during the early years. But if you know me, you know I'm passionate about certain things, and this is one of them. So it's going to seep through. I promise I won't go all Ricky Ricardo on y'all. Hopefully some of the people on this call are old enough to know what I'm talking about when I say that. For those that are not, that's I Love Lucy reference. The thing here is that this type of work has been sort of key to us in the beginning. And as a researcher, the one thing that has always been important for me is understanding differences and the strength that comes from it. And I think that's something that a lot of us will probably have, key to our heart as we do this. I'm also passionate about systemic racism. Being a Hispanic, being a woman, I've had to have my own struggles. I didn't have it easy at the beginning. In fact, when my family first came to the U.S., there was things that happened that led to some real big discriminations and wrongful incarceration on their part. And it's heavy stuff, but it's part of my thread and part of the reason why I can sit at this table today and be very true to this conversation. Like many of you in the call, I think as usability professionals, we can change the world. I think that has been part of the reason why we all got into this work. My hope today, as we do this, is that each and every one of you can walk away with a framework that we've created, that we're ready to turn over to the world. We did this work and we thought about how we might do this. Part of what we decided to do was that it just couldn't live with us. It had to go beyond us. So welcome. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Eugene?
Cool. Thank you, Anya. For those on the East Coast, good morning. For those who are a little further west in the country, or good afternoon, right? Good morning for those that are a little further west in the country. My name is Eugenio Santiago. I manage the research team at Keyline Interactive. Like Anya, I'm Hispanic, Puerto Rican to be exact. I'll start with a fun fact. I'm employee number 1 at Keyline Interactive. I've had the honor of working side by side with Anya for the last decade or so. I started, in the trenches as the person handling all the minutia of executing user research projects, and now I have the responsibility of leading a growing team of amazing UX research consultants. I'm also a dad of 3 beautiful Afro-Latinx children, and I chose these 2 things because I take these 2 roles and responsibilities that go with them to heart. I feel like overall, one of my jobs is to prepare my children, and I sort of include my team in that, right, to be successful in life. With my kids, right, one day, unfortunately, that's going to include having to have, the talk with them. I've got 2 little boys and a little girl. For my Keyline team, it's about showing them how to be better at their job and how to be impactful in what they do. So that's why today, like Anya, I'm excited to show you what we've started and to give you guys some insight into why we started it. And the goal was, and it remains, to do meaningful work.
Awesome. So 12 years ago, we embarked on this journey. Eugene was employee number 1, for better, for worse, because we started off as a sort of multicultural team. And for those that have been part of the team over the years, I see some familiar names there. That we've been, because of the fact that we've always hired a multicultural team and it's been part of our thread, we've been afforded some phenomenal opportunities to do work with a number of government agencies and a number of the big Fortune 500 companies from the get-go, from day number 1. And this includes some really important work that started years ago with Amazon and Google and a number of others, and today continues to grow We've always had this as an underlying voice. It hasn't been a primary thing, but because I think of the work that we have done and some of the work that we've done with different audiences has afforded us that. And so it's been wonderful because the people that have been part of my team have been part of very important work very early on, not something that just was born last year or so. It's been going on for years. As you know, as many of you know, we've worked with, you know, a number of Fortune 500. I see some clients here, I see some folks that it makes me happy when I'm seeing names pop up that I know. But yeah, from the get-go, we've been fighting for representation, and that's just not just with race. We've done it for sexual orientation, for age, and a number of other sort of key social sort of issues and needs. Next slide, please. So those that have become of our team, our current team has about 18 different ethnicities and you know, folks from different sexual orientation, different age groups. You know, core to us is making sure that we hire the right team that can do the right thing, that are open and honest, see the puzzle. They're dynamic and they know how to put a ribbon on it. And for us, our purpose and which we're going to extend here is to make a difference, right? The thing that gets us up every morning and the thing that makes us do the work that we want to do at the end is that we want to make a difference. And we want to do that in our world through better design products and services that integrates the voices of everyone. And so yeah, from the get-go, diversity has been part of our roots. And it's been part of our trade secret. It wasn't something that just turned on last year for us.
Thanks, Anya. So last year, this is, you know, I'll set some context. Like I mentioned, I want to not just share with everyone on the call what we did, but really want to sort of help everyone understand sort of the thought process that happened internally. So about a year ago, this time, right, when the social conscience of our country was awakened, or more appropriately shaken, right? Like everywhere else, all over the country, all over the world, we're having conversations. And at Keyline, we were having real conversations about what the hell was going on and what we could or should do about it. We didn't have the answers then. We don't presume to have all the answers now, but we really wanted to identify what we could do. Not just as humans, right? A lot of the conversations we're talking about, let's go and protest, let's go and donate, let's support these things. And we did those things and those things are great, but that still didn't feel like Keyline, right? What we could do as a company, right? Not just as individuals. So we started asking ourselves, right? What's the space that we could occupy? What were the things that our company had license to do? Anya mentioned this before, and we believe this, right? We know that as researchers, the work that we do is critically linked to diversity and inclusion. As researchers, right, one of the things that we decide is who participates in studies, right? Whose voices are included, which ones are excluded. We determine who the findings, you know, and by association, the products and experiences, who they choose to include and who they choose to exclude. So we began to ask ourselves, right, in a world where systemic oppression exists, how reliable are the services that we use at ensuring our participant pool is intentionally or isn't intentionally or unintentionally biased? What, if anything, were we doing to be deliberate about making sure that regardless of whatever resources we were using, that Keyline was doing something about it? And that's really where the idea of the Inclusivity Index was born. Keyline's Inclusivity Index is about paying attention to who participates in our studies overall. Our studies, right, typically, like most others, have screening criteria where we're generally looking for specific user segments, but the questions or the metrics that we normally use to qualify participants tend to be hyper-focused on behavior, on job roles, or what products they might use or buy, right? None of this is wrong, by the way. None of this is bad. But being sort of reflective, there were definitely times where, you know, I'm guilty of it and have sort of seen where sometimes we might be too quick to dismiss certain criteria in a screener simply because, we're not going to use the data, right? Or we're not going to look at it that way. So why ask the question? And so the Inclusivity Index isn't about just looking at the short-term implications of the study, at least initially, right, for us at Keyline. But it was really about taking a look at how we were running our research practice and being attuned to, the potential selection bias or information bias that might naturally exist within research. Again, there are times when focusing on a specific user group is warranted or appropriate, like if we're doing a study for customers only, right? But that isn't always the case. For us, we believe that diversity and perspective yields better results, and the inclusivity, we hope, is a step in the direction of deliberately paying attention to or being aware of, right, how poorly or how well we're doing in this regard. Like Anya mentioned, this was we started it as a step to collect some information so that at minimum we could look back as an organization and say, hey, what are we doing? Are we doing a good enough job? And what sort of adjustments, if any, do we need to do to get better? And we decided, like Anya mentioned, that this isn't just for us, right? It's bigger than us. It's more valuable. And so today, formally, we're sharing it with everyone on the call and, who isn't on the call and hopes to sort of use it. So really quickly, because we'll start to get into the details, right? Our agenda for the remainder of the presentation is going to include a few things. So Anya and I will take turns walking folks through the framework of the Keyline Inclusivity Index. We'll talk about its components. We'll talk about what it's made of, those sorts of elements, as well as we'll talk about how we're using it in practice today and how you might be able to use it moving forward as well.
So we'll go ahead and start with telling you a little bit about what is the Keyline Inclusivity Index, okay? And so the Inclusivity Index, it's a 3-point index intended to highlight underrepresentation for traditionally marginalized groups. And I kind of read it straight off the slide here, but I did that intentionally because when we started looking at ways that we might want to look at the data that we had, and part of the activity which we did to sort of arrive at here is we went back and looked at the last couple years of our participant grids and where we had this information, just tried to see what we had sort of collected along the line. And obviously we didn't always collect all this information, but we wanted to see how skewed or not skewed we were. So we kind of did a little bit of an inventory of where we were, if you will. And looking at that and looking at what we can also tie to something that is meaningful, right? When we do multicultural research, we tend to, this is part of like 101 multicultural research, you want to mirror as much as possible the population. So if we're running, the work with Hispanics, we're going to do, about 50 to 60%, Mexican Americans, and then we'll, break down to Puerto Ricans and Cubans, and then, sort of accordingly thereafter, right? That mirroring allows us to have representation. Similar when we're looking at, research within the Black American, there's certain things that we look out for. They're similar with Asian Americans or with, age groups, et cetera, et cetera. And so as we were doing this, we kind of said, okay, we know we often will kind of look back to census data, right? To see if we're rightly, if we're indexed over and under index. And this is where the team here at Keyline started talking about how we could pull this together so that we can look at whether we were at index. In other words, we were sort of mirroring what is representative of the U.S. population. We were a little bit better than at index. We were progressively indexed, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about this in a couple of slides. So just bear with me a minute here. Or we were under index, and we really didn't look at this when we were doing research, and really sort of awareness was key here, right? The first step, and I had a conversation with a couple of folks at Forrester about this framework, and really it was at first it was just really understanding did we do a good job, or have we done a good job? Because we talked about this, we know we've done a lot of this work, but how well did we sort of scale ourselves? And then how well could we do this work in the future so that our clients, not directly, like, some of folks might feel a little bit off when you sort of, present this initially, but it's just creating awareness so that, either during the research itself or post research, they could, understand where they're sort of missing gaps in that research. And so the goal of the Inclusivity Index is basically, has been, and it is currently, to help, people, clients, teams understand what biases exist and sort of minimizes and mitigate this as best as you can, right? And so giving people awareness of what they've pulled together. And oftentimes I've seen screeners over the last year sort of take away and reduce number of questions. And sometimes these questions are like, we don't really need that. We already have too many questions. We're really intentional of keeping those there because we want to make sure that when we do the work, we are mindful of the fact that it's that we need to be that we need to have a diverse perspective, and we want to be able to understand if there's those gaps, so that later, if we say, okay, this work needs to really sort of take a different view, then we know how much of how good of a job or how bad of a job we've done to sort of meet that criterion. So a couple of years ago, we had a client that is in the real estate industry, and we were looking at the end-to-end customer journey of a renter. And later on, we sort of took a different viewpoint. We said, okay, let's look at it by different lenses, right? So we wanted to see, how that experience changed end-to-end based on the fact that you might be, Black or Hispanic or LGBTQ, and how did that play into the research itself? And we were able to do that because we were able to understand like how much of that work we could already have from existing data, and then how much we needed to sort of augment so that we can have a full perspective on that. Next slide, Eugene.
Cool. So I'll get into a few more details here. So Anya mentioned sort of the 3 fixed attributes that we have. Generally speaking, when we're running a study, we can have anywhere from 3 to 5. We have the 3 fixed attributes for gender, racial diversity, and sexual orientation. And then for each project, we typically also recommend or have 2 additional attributes. But the goal of those 2 is to find out what makes sense for the project that we're doing, right? So this is not, sometimes age is important and age will be included, right? Sometimes it could be accessibility. It could be geography. It could be household income, right? This is where you have to use your brain as a researcher and figure out, right, what's going to add the most value, or where there might be blind spots that the stakeholder at the end, whether it's a client or internal group, right, could potentially benefit from. The 3 were chosen intently, right? They're 3 groups or classifications that have been historically overlooked. And so we want to make sure that, again, we understand the society that we live in, the presence of systemic biases and discrimination that exist. And this is, again, an attempt to try to start to unravel that, right? Undo that. This is the work that's going to be difficult. It's going to be time consuming. It's going to take time. Unfortunately, right, it will not happen overnight. But like Anya mentioned, we need to have these conversations. We need to be aware of these things, right? It needs to be part of what is going on. This also, to just so that folks are clear, this isn't about doing multicultural research. When we're doing multicultural research, obviously we're paying attention to these things. This is about your regular run-of-the-mill, UX and CX research, right? Don't make these assumptions, because if nobody is paying attention to them, then very likely, they're intentionally or unintentionally getting overlooked. And, we don't agree with that.
Yeah. I will, Eugene, real quickly before you kind of add, We had a question come in. I think it's timely just to make sure we answer it. And I think you kind of mostly answered it, but we talked, when we looked at the dimensions, there's a sort of a question around why we omitted or added, certain ones. The Jonathan basically said he can see, I think I just lost it, age, disability, ableism, if you will, educational levels, and et cetera. I can answer it, but whatever. Do you want to just go ahead and answer, and then I can add to it? If that's works for you.
Go for it.
Yeah. So it's not that we didn't omit anything. In fact, we looked at all those, and now at the core value, we knew that we needed these three, like Eugene noted. Part of what we've systemized, and we'll talk about that in sort of a couple slides back, is now we've actually started to create, and it is part of the early access of what you'll have in your starter kit, if you will. We've actually systemized other factors, but we wanted to make sure we had data to tie back to, so that we can see whether we're indexed and over and under index, right? And so you'll see a little bit of that play, but we have been using ableism, age, education levels very consistently as sort of the additional variables that we go into, depending again on depending on the client and their long-term objectives, if you will, but we're keeping that data as well. So it's not like we're not keeping that data, just so you're clear. And so if you have that data and that's important to you, I think that we want to be able to see that data. The hope here is that we'll pull together as a community and kind of see where there's sort of blind spots. And so that's the thinking, Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. I think, Eugene, do you want to add anything to that too?
No. So I guess like Anya mentioned, right, we wanted to do a good job. We wanted to get started. We wanted to not bite off more than we can chew. And so it really think of it more as like, these are the minimums. If you have the space, if you have the wherewithal to be more inclusive, ask more questions, by all means do it. We highly, highly encourage it, right? But this is sort of like brass tacks, the lowest common denominator. Whether you want it as a client or not, we're going to ask the question. We don't have to put it in the presentation.
And ageism is 9 out of 10, one of the extras, just so you know, 9 out of 10. In fact, that's one we have systemized. So like, I know that Michael said, that's an important one. I agree 100%. We agree 100%. And it's 9 out of 10 becomes the extra one, always. One of the two, at least. So go ahead, Eugene, sorry. Oh, it's my turn now. Okay, sorry, I kind of went off. So basically, part of this is, and the reason why we want to open it to the community is like, we don't pretend to know it all. Okay, that's, if you know us, we're really good at what we do, but we know that we are part of a conversation, right? And so part of why we wanted to open up this dialogue and really show you what we got is exactly this. We kind of want to make sure that we're building something that everyone can use and that you can share with your stakeholders and the like. And so our pilot, for all intents and purposes, that's run over the year, has been using these things, but by all means, it's a starting point. And I think it's a key to say that. And I think the reason why Eugene and I thought this opportunity with Elizabeth was such a phenomenal opportunity is that, she's been such a pivotal person in our industry and sort of giving a way to give into our sort of community. It was important for us to kind of pick a venue that could be meaningful beyond just us doing our own sort of thing in our corner with our clients, right? And so yeah, I think this is all I ask here is like, let's keep working through it. Let's make sure we add through it. You'll see how we did it. All we ask in return for like us opening this up is really for you to share what you're learning and if you're using this, to attribute, but like, honestly, the goal of this is to be much bigger than us and really just kind of give in. And so this is a conversation starter.
Can I just add one thing? Thank you for saying that. And the truth is that, that's what the speaker series is about. It's about, amplifying and elevating voices that get marginalized usually. And it happens in our research all the time. Yeah. So this is real important. So let's keep pressing on, keep the dialogue going.
Yeah. I mean, I've had conversations with some clients at Facebook and a number of other companies. I know there's a lot of similar work happening. That's why it's important that we pull together and just pull and kind of make sure we're all sort of thinking and adding to it and the like. So Eugene, this is your slide, I think, right?
Yeah,
I'm about to take over.
it's okay. I mean, it's fluid, right? So this is just a little bit of context for the rating, right? In a few slides, we'll talk about sort of the different components of it, the dimensions, the insights that we get from it. But one of them is just the simple identification of where your study's participants lie across these dimensions, and like Anya mentioned, to what extent are they at index, under, or progressively indexed. There are, we realize sometimes that the research that we do can introduce the biases that exist. The industries that we operate in are sometimes, big contributors to the bias or the skew that might exist in those areas. And so, again, one of the, I think, major things, one of the major conversations that we have when we're communicating this is, again, this isn't about pointing the finger at an industry, at a company, and telling them that they're doing a bad job. Again, this is about just being open about, truthfully, right, the limitations of the research that we just did. Does it answer every single question that you have? No, right? It's focused, it answers the questions that it set out to answer, but there's an awareness of, hey, if you're interested, if you see an opportunity that exists, right, pursue those. Continue to do more work, more thinking, more research in those areas. And again, this is kind of what that, what this is about, at this particular, at this particular stage. And it's just about having those conversations and not taking them for granted, and just sort of bringing it to the forefront, where it makes sense and where it's appropriate.
So I know that there's a lot of chatter about DEI in across a number of Fortune 500s and the like, and everyone's sort of trying to increase their take on it, right, and increase their footprint, if you will, and really trying to be a lot more socially responsible within the organization. For us, the goal here again is to continue to encourage this, right? And so you often see these DEI efforts are usually done for recruiting people to go work for these companies, but no one's really looking at it from like making sure that as we curb and really just do research for our clients, that the customers that we're inviting in or the participants that we're inviting in are representative. I saw that. I think there's, I agree with a lot of the comments I'm seeing coming in. There's, a fair, and again, we've seen, a lot of work into different. What the interesting thing is that, even despite sort of being very vocal about these sort of core, if you will, dimensions and the like, oftentimes. We'll see a little bit of resistance, right? We'll see a little bit of like, wait, you're asking these questions. Oh, wow, that's, do we really want to know that information? And we're trying to break that barrier. So that part of this work is really sort of making sure that as a community, we're doing a better job to ensure that while people want to talk the talk, and I've been, quite frankly, I've been paraded around so much for being a woman of color, for being like, as a business owner, I get invited to, and I get pulled into so many different things. Oh, like there's like token Hispanic or the token minority, if you will. And it sometimes it's kind of like, it's kind of depressing to kind of think about. I've had a lot of conversations with other minorities and the like, but I think it's important here. The difference here between when that happens and what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to really raise awareness and really create create an understanding that is much needed in across all these large entities that we typically will see that it's just a little bit of a dog and pony, but not really a real intent to really to pull those in those perspectives. And I get it in certain ways. It gets hard sometimes to think about this. As we go into the next couple of slides, you'll see, and you can, and if you put yourself in your foot of your client, or if you are an end client, you can already kind of feel probably the resistance that'll come through this. But this is why we're here, right? We're creating this conversation and creating this awareness. We can't underestimate insights that we get from these diverse populations. I think Neil, I think just said, we can't underestimate users. We can't underestimate, Dana said, disability status, like that has to be part of the work that we do. If not, we are not really doing our job as researchers. So, Eugene, take it away. Let's start the actual applying.
So thanks, Anya. So we've given you, a brief high-level overview of what the Inclusivity Index is, its purpose, and again, at a very high level, what it consists of. There's going to be Q&A, so if you have questions, don't feel like they're going to go unanswered. We may not get to all of the questions. There's definitely a way to reach us afterwards, right? We want to keep this conversation going, but we want to also kind of move it forward a little bit and sort of show you what we've been doing or how we've been trying to integrate it in practice. And so one of the things that we've done is we've integrated the Inclusivity Index into Keylime's proven process. This slide here is just a visualization of some of the primary places where you can customarily find it in our projects today. So for studies that we're responsible for doing the recruiting for, it's made it into all of our screeners. I'll show in more detail in just a moment. We have a disclaimer that's part of the screener that describes the purpose of collecting these questions. They're all optional, but we strongly encourage people to answer them, honestly and truthfully if they feel so obliged to do so. And then there's dedicated space within our reports, properly prioritized after we're answering the primary questions of the research project. But there's space in there too where we've created assets where we're, again, bringing this information to light to our customers. One thing that isn't shown here, but that Anya will mention in a little bit, is how it's also important for this to be surfaced early in the conversation with our clients, right, and our stakeholders. So for us at Keylime, that means that it's made its way all the way into the sales process, right, into proposal documentation. It's also something that we make a point to discuss when we're formally kicking off a project with the client, right? It's a conversation. Just like when we're fine-tuning the scope, we're talking about logistics, we're talking about our communication plan, the Inclusivity Index and the variables that make sense for that particular project, for that particular client, is also something that is discussed at the onset to get buy-in, so that everyone is aware of it, that no one is surprised, right, if there are things that are included later. And like Anya mentioned, sometimes it's where the client puts their foot down and says, hey, I'm not interested, I don't want that part of the report, and those kinds of things. It's where those conversations happen as well.
The key thing here, just Eugene, before you move that, is that you really need to, you need to desynthesize this conversation right from the get-go, right? And so as you think about the stuff we've done here, and we're showing you how we do it, that the key thing that you have to do is basically be very forward from the start, that this is sort of the intentions that you're trying to do, and be ready and informed and have sources ready. I've seen a couple of questions of how we done our sources. We'll show you what we got, because that's going to be, you have to be super prepared by people who are not as informed, if I would say it nicely, and really just want to, and really just we're sad to know, but it's going to be a little bit of a resistance. So you got to be prepared to understand that that's going to happen, right? And you have to be able to hold and really give them sort of a moment for them to understand the value, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that and how you communicate the findings themselves, how you do this work, how you write recommendations in a bit. But I just wanted to say that up front because it isn't for the faint of heart. It gets a little bit more difficult, and you'll see that what happens is not exactly how we all dream it should happen, right? So it's taken a lot of sort of starts and stops and things like that. Lucky for us, we've been able to build trust, and a lot of our clients have really sort of taken to this. But I will tell you, there is it's still work. There's still work there. So so with that, Eugene, why don't we go to the sort of how we start with the screeners?
Cool.
So you know, we talked about this. Like Eugene said, we have to, you know, be very forward and disclose and put like almost a disclaimer at the top of things, right? You know, this shouldn't be a surprise by the time they get a screener from us, right? And the like, but it is, but it's something that, because as everyone knows, is not usually the people on the phone. Everybody starts looking at the screener, and different groups look at the screeners that are outside of your conversation topics. So you kind of you're going to keep having to communicate this as you're doing the work, right? And so it's not just like, you know, say it at the beginning and say it at the end. It's saying it every time you have a conversation. Everything you put in there, you have to be very explicit so everybody understands why we're doing the things we're doing. And so you know, we started with these. We started with these three. Like I said, age and ableism has been top of these sort of next two that kind of always come in play. But we actually played with this language a lot of times before we got to final sort of this language, right? You know, I think there's you'll get a lot of resistance from number one, number two, number three. People are more used to seeing, but number one and number two, especially the way it's written, and you know, it's the right way to write it, but people just are, you know, you'll see their biases, and unfortunately you'll see a little bit of things you don't want to see, because they're just like, hey, can we just leave it to male and female and just let's keep it at that. And you have to really be able to have that conversation. I think it's important to understand that, you know, and I've heard, you know, I've been on calls where people are like, oh, I'm really getting, you know, tired with these pronouns and things like that. It's really ugly when I hear those things, and I just I want to hang up, right? Because it's just so but yeah, it's important. So you'll see, we've heard it on call after call when we start playing these things. And so it's like Tara said, being very intentional versus hidden language here. So basically what we have is and you know, we this is what we have, and if you know, one of the things we'll give you with our starter kit, we actually have more questions than these three, but and we have the other ones for ableism and the like, but just we wanted to have these three because we're trying to, at least at the very minimum, be very you know, sort of capture the same language. Obviously, if we want to look at data across a lot of research, we're using the same language. So our clients, we pretty much don't give them much flexibility to change this, unless we, you know, we say, okay, we're not, you know, like we get to the point where we're not going to, they're really sort of drawing the line, if you will, and even then we draw the line back. So it's kind of this back and forth a bit on our perspective to get them to understand this. I mean, we don't surprise them, right? So at this point, we keep, you know, we'll have to educate them to come back to this. But these are the sort of the three that we've arrived at. Again, like I said, the reason why we're opening this, if you have been looking at, you know, and looking at this and done this work too, and you have more to add to this, we are way open. This is again, this is us all together. So Eugene, next slide, please.
Yep. One other thing to mention is, you know, like Anya mentioned, there are instances where we may deviate a totally acceptable scenario where it makes sense to sort of tweak or deviate, as if, you know, the team or the company that we're working with has been collecting this kind of information in a very sort of specific way, right? And that obviously we want to make sure that the insights that we're collecting are as comparable and compatible to, the index of information that they already have. And that's sort of part of the conversation. Another really small thing to mention, but just in case anyone has like a question, this, like the illustration on the slide before indicates, typically is at the bottom, right? Like good screening, questionnaire, best practices, right? We move anything that isn't disqualifying, we move it down so that we can, we can sort of like hone in. So this is sort of that additional important information that we're collecting. So to talk about each one of the questions in a little bit more, in more detail, right? For the gender question, right, in an effort to not be restrictive and to give participants, right, the space to self-identify, ideally, gender is programmed as an open-ended text response question. If for some reason, particularly for like technical reasons, right, if you can't ask it in that particular way, if your study is so large that you need something that's a bit more close-ended, then here are some suitable variations for the question. Of the two, you don't have to you can ignore the number, they're not necessarily in order, but of the two, number 3, I say, would be the version that we used if we opt for a close-ended list. But we strongly recommend, whenever possible, to use the open text response as the way you go about presenting this question. For ethnicity and race, Anya mentioned, right, this is one that a lot more folks are more comfortable with, more accustomed to. This latest version of the question is based off of the most recent census survey. And so again, when we talk about doing the comparison to index, that's the primary reason why this version of the question what is being used. It's important though, make sure that it's multiple choice, right? Select all that apply so people can self-identify if they're mixed, if they're multi-ethnic, all right, but the options are there for them to choose. And then for this question, the sexual orientation question, it's not important at all for what we are currently, looking at, where on the spectrum a particular or an individual participant lies. It's rather focused on trying to capture if they fall within this marginalized group. And so for that very specific reason, again, we ask the question in this manner, as opposed to listing out the different options or having it sort of, open-ended. So these are, again, we're focusing today, on the fixed attributes that make up the Inclusivity Index. And so this is the front end of designing the questions and collecting the information, right? So what happens next, right? After you collect the information, we're comparing it against the census distribution data and other recommended data sources so that we can, elicit the insights that we ultimately will turn into recommendations. So on this slide here, actually, let's see.
And this slide, it basically shows, so we talked about how we communicate the data within the report, right? And so part of what we do is, I think this is the, as we'll talk a little bit about how this now starts playing itself into the report and how we communicate findings around things, right? And so in our case, and we'll give you this in the language that we use, but basically we have a slide that basically sort of, tells you again, sort of the importance of this and how to use it, right? And typically for us, there's, we talked about 3 being, but there's typically 5 that we include, right, in our questionnaires that we're looking at data over time. the point here is that as we do this, we're trying to improve sort of those interactions, right? And so as you present this in your deck and in your final deliverables, you'll want to make sure you include this sort of as a section in, right? In our case, we typically put it, in the report, depending on, how, depending on the client, either the front, middle, and the last. It really comes down to where the, how important, or how well, how important they want to highlight it to their stakeholders, if you will, just like you might do it for your company. But the point here is that it's important to sort of basically, the word I'm looking for is, Eugene, it's important to introduce it. How about that? That's the word I'm trying to look for. Introduce it. And so go ahead. Next slide, please. So go ahead, Eugene.
Yep. So this is a visualization of what a finished product slide might look like. And so, it has all of the elements that we've discussed, right? So we've got the dimensions that were used, the ones that are fixed, as well as the variable ones. There is the rating that we spoke about before. So, for each dimension, are you at index or not? And then there are some notable call outs. And then this section here is meant to, explain, provide some context about, the dimension relative to the project, the industry, right? The space in which we're doing this analysis. And so I had to, block out some information here, but, it talks about the racial diversity here, and the fact that in this particular study, right, there's overrepresentation within a particular ethnic group. Again, neither good nor bad, but imagine as a business, right, if you had a marketing person who perhaps was interested in acquisition, right? Again, these are conversation starters meant to point out opportunities where, again, maybe someone is interested in pursuing, opportunities that either come from the research, or maybe there, is other research that someone is interested in doing, right? And so this is the first of at least 2 slides that are included. And this is, again, about sort of context setting and just sort of saying, very factually, hey, within this round of research, this is sort of how we compare to the index across the different dimensions.
One thing important to note here, just before you go, Eugene, is we all know how it goes, right? You're trying to recruit for a study. You need to do it quickly. You're realizing you're having a hard time because you have criteria in the top that might be making it really hard for you to find people that are, I think this is an example of a gaining study, right? And so all of a sudden you're trying to figure out what you can relax. Part of what this does too, it's okay. Obviously we're all going to have to relax at one point with criteria, et cetera. It's okay to do that. What this creates is a bit of awareness that you did that. And if you're doing that every time, there's a problem, right? If every time you relax it, that's sort of what you're trying to look at, right? So when you look at maybe just one project at a time, that's fine. But if you look at your last 12 months of projects and you realize you've always been relaxing certain criteria, that's where sort of the awareness, like, oh goodness, I really need to do better and set sort of my, boundaries of when I'm able to do that. Because if every project you for whatever reason, this one is a more female focus, but for whatever, you just have males in the study, or you don't even think about sexual orientation, that you can't say you're committed to diversity and then not look at these things, right? And so I'll just tell you this, at the individual study level, we include this, and it's just awareness. Hey, we had to do this. We were running low on time. We did this, but as you compile the year worth of data, that is your go-to, then that's where there's the problem, right? And that's what you try to avoid.
Mm-hmm. This next one here is an example of what the recommendations, might look like for a given project. And so again, it clearly identifies the dimensions, and then we highlight areas of opportunity for the product, for the brand, right, for the service. To Anya's point, right, to pay attention, to be more mindful of how inclusive or not they are, and steps that can, that can be made. Anya mentioned early, and I think this still rings true. We're doing this because we believe it matters, because we think that there's a better way of executing research. The people consuming this, they need to care too, right? And I think that's kind of one of the biggest challenges at the moment is making them mindful of it, bringing that level of awareness to it so that they start to pay attention to it. Maybe not immediately, right? But that it starts to make its way into natural conversation. And so that's really what we're trying, trying to do here. And again, to sort of bring this additional perspective that maybe they knew about, or in some cases, right, maybe we're just not paying attention to, not focused on, not aware of. And that's really, it's both the challenge, but the work that we set out to do. So just some tips with respect to the recommendations and how we try to go about doing them, and things that we've seen sort of over time, tend to work a little bit better in terms of, people being more open to hearing these is, whenever possible, give a recommendation on how to be more inclusive in the next research study. You can give recommendations on how this may be a blind spot within the industry, within that particular, company. And again, right, like Anya mentioned, if the goal is to be more inclusive, to be diverse, then it's about helping them remember that, right, at minimum, and giving them, giving them ways to remedy that. Obviously, because we're having conversations early in the process with the client, what we hear, what we learn from those conversations, it's important, right, to continue to sort of pull that thread all the way into the end. And so if there's anything that was brought up early in the process, right, that helps provide context in terms of how we present this, how we communicate this, right, understanding, right, the job as in UX, when you're communicating to your stakeholders who typically are not, researchers, it's drinking the Kool-Aid that we tell everyone, like, who is your audience? What do they care about, right? How do they measure success, right? This is no different. It's about weaving this information into a package that is going to resonate with someone so that they want to do something, that they feel like they need to do something, about it, right? And then that goes a long way into sort of smoothing out how you communicate this information. And this is we're still storytellers, so this is an opportunity, right, where if it warrants and it makes sense, right, it gives you an opportunity also to focus in on a participant, a group of participants, right, and help them communicate, the story that the data is suggesting. We mentioned, someone asked, I believe, question about the resources. Here's an example of some of the resources that we use. Like Anya mentioned, this is not an all-inclusive list. Like any element of the Inclusivity Index, we open it up to the community. If you have reliable resources that you use, we'd love to make others aware of where they can look, and where they can index the data that they're collecting. But these are some of the ones that we've been using most frequently.
I think yeah, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
This is for you.
So yeah, you know, I talked a little bit about this earlier, which is, you know, as we started embarking and really sort of putting our sort of line in the sand, if you will, you know, we really, we had to make sure we did a couple of things, right? And so part of why this has worked so well with Keyline is we've had a team that really sort of took on this internally, right? To, you know, this, we're here to presenting what the team has done as a whole, right? Eugene and I are not the only ones that are part of this. We have people like Marina and Samantha and Minty have been, you know, who've been part of this journey, and others on the team that continue to carry this forward. But really the point here is that as we did this work, we had to do a lot of conversations about sensitizing, understanding our difference. This is understanding, because we do have, like I mentioned, 18 plus different ethnicities, understanding those differences, understanding how we talk to each other. It's so easy to say, almost feel like you said the wrong thing because you just don't know, like it feels like sometimes you're walking in landmines when you're having these conversations. And I think there's a little bit of conversation there. I'm trying to keep up with the questions a bit around language and the way you use language. And I think, you know, as you do this, I think the most important thing as you start thinking about implementing this with your team is being very upfront and open and saying, listen, you know, this is, you know, the perspective I'm coming based on sort of these. I don't pretend to know it all. Like, I think it's important to say that straight up. And just, you know, making sure that you're able to offer that perspective and have sources handy and look at things, because you're going to need that same thing as you're going out to clients and the like. Someone just asked, has DEI, maybe generally speaking, really worked? I'm starting to, it's incredible enough. I think that the events that happened last year, I feel really kind of moved things forward. The first time ever, and I said this earlier, I mean, like there's really a movement. For a very long time, I felt there was a lot of parading going on. Now there seems to be much more happening to do that. And so I'll tell you this, as a woman of color and sometimes going to these, you know, doing these things, I think it's finally moving. And that's why I think it's important to be part of it now. And not that I've never been part of it, but I've been really sort of put in the framework that really kind of pulls it together. But the big part that worked for us was that we did do a lot of work to asking for feedback along the way. So we presented this, we talked about it, we synthesized, and as you do this, you're going to have to ask for feedback. Just like we're asking this community for feedback, I don't want this conversation to end right now. I want to continue to draw from all of our lived experiences and knowledge and really pull forth. And I think there's a lot of people on this chat that I've been looking at that I don't, you know, I think it's important that you know, if there's things you think that should be added, things we missed, like let's do this. Let's figure out how to fix it and make it better, because the more that we know, the more that I feel that we can really be mindful as we speak about the topic. And for us, you know, we have a couple of people who are specialized in different parts of, you know, research. And when we're doing research, we want to make sure that's being representative. So like when we're doing Black research, we usually have a Black moderator. We want to be able to mirror things like and have that be part of it. We also have folks on our team who have specialty in this. And if you're feeling like you don't know enough about what you don't know, then my recommendation is that, you know, to feel free to reach out and ask for advice. Oftentimes we see that sort of just someone needing just to say to validate, yeah, this sounds good or not. And again, like we'll, you know, based on what we know, we've been doing this long enough. It didn't just start yesterday. We just formalized it this last year, but we've been doing this since the beginning, right? And so happy to connect on those things. But it's important that you always like know that as you open this conversation, you're gonna have to like do a really good job at just making sure everybody is open and being very, you know, using the skills. The beauty of this, like Eugene said, that's the beauty of it, is we're right in the right position because we've all been taught and how to listen and do that work. So it's all about listening here. So part of this, you know, we've talked about, you know, how we're, you know, creating almost, you know, obviously without any PII, but really sort of an understanding of how that fits in, and really sort of understanding how we're doing it longitudinally, not just in one-off projects, right? And then beyond that, we've started to create our own tools, if you will, that that we can talk about later. But I think the important thing is that we've taken this a little bit even one step further, right? So we talked a little bit about sort of that framework and exclusivity. As many of us are doing work within our research and putting together personas and the like, this also comes into play, right? So how well are you representing, again, and your different personas present in the scenario that I have here in the screenshot is I have 3 different personas. You know, how well does these personas and the data you have behind them represent, like, you know, the population, and it represents your current customer base. So we have 2 sort of ways to index, right? So an inclusivity index, and then your current customer. And this is our basic one. We have an advanced feature that allows you to look at it more from percentiles and look at, you know, how well you're over indexed or under indexed and progressively indexed and the like. But this work kind of doesn't just sit at the beginning of sort of the work that you might do in the individual projects. As you're thinking through this, you also have to think about how you might represent that within your personas. And right now where we're at is we've built something within one of our tools that allows us to capture that and start looking at that data as well. So.
Sorry, I muted myself. So I know we're at just after the top of the hour, and Elizabeth wanted to make sure we had, you know, space for Q&A. Before we get to that really quickly, you know, this is an opening of this to the community, right? And encouraging folks to join us on using this, on trying to, you know, push this forward. I think, you know, the hope one day is for this not to be retrospective, right? For this not to be solely longitudinal, but if we can collect enough information, then we can recommend out the gate, you know, what is appropriate or what, you know, is more inclusive and can sort of bring that, you know, to the table. And so Anya mentioned this, you know, reach out. We're putting together a starter kit. We want to share it with folks. This is also another opportunity if you have, you know, we're going to have Q&A, but if you have additional questions, we can certainly set aside some time to discuss this with folks. Again, to give you a little bit more insight into what we've seen either has worked or hasn't worked. And again, too, we hope that, you know, maybe we can do this regularly, right? And we can continue to learn and iterate on this and continue to make it better. It's early-ish in the process for the Inclusivity Index. We did put a lot of thought into it, but we fully expect to continue to evolve it. And we want people, like you have been on this call, ask questions, you know, critique it. We truly believe that will make it better.
Thank you. First, I want to do like the virtual applause. Okay, this is so. This was. I knew what you were going to talk about, and yet I feel even like happily surprised with some of the details. I knew how much work you put in because, you know, we talked about this before, but just okay. So I want to start the dialogue, but you had one more slide there, so let me.
No, I mean, this is really we could go into the Q&A. I mean, this is we talked about this, right? This is
yeah.
We recognize this is not easy. I've been in many conversations trying to implement this, and it's very uncomfortable, right? First conversation with the client, we're trying to do everything good, and they're giving us the feels like they don't want or have time for this, you know, at all. But that hasn't stopped us, and that won't deter us. And so we felt like this quote from James Baldwin was appropriate in that it's not going to be easy, and maybe it doesn't get changed, but none of those are excuses for us to not try. And so we're trying.
I 100% support that. I love the quote. And I think I said to you when I saw this, it's also nice to see his face. Seen so many of the quotes without the face. And I always like to put those two together. But I think, you know, anything is like that, right? Unless you actually name it and know that it's a thing you need to change, it's never going to change. And I wanted to add, you know, I love this, that you guys are, you know, talking about like stakeholders and your clients, but I hate to say this, and there may be a few of my past students on here too, but I've raised this sometimes with student projects, and it really is the exact same issue where they're like, but I'm running out of time. And, you know, and it's like, I had already started to think that at the very least, if they just, if all of us could always just collect this data as a baseline, and then, like you guys are saying, start to come together and figure out what are we really doing, and what, you know, we do influence, we influence people, and how is that happening? So before we get into the open stuff, there was just a few questions that I saw in here that didn't completely get answered. So I'll just go through a few of those I saw in the chat that I think didn't get answered, and then we can see if anyone has anything else they want to say. But there was one question about how you came up with the options for the two alternatives for the gender identity. I was curious about that.
Let's see.
That's wrong.
No, I got it here. So yeah, so the options, again, the options are not great. They're certainly not what we lead with. You know, it's definitely about, we want to give people the opportunity to self-identify primarily, but also, you know, it's based on some primary research that was done, census data. You know,
we also have some people who've done their PhDs on this work. So just so this
Okay.
is this one was like, this is there's like we say we are their masters or PhD have been very focused on this work. So we kind of they've done this, and I kind of lean in like where the point is. I think
Well, finish. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I think that for us.
Yeah, no, it's good to know. I think this is, you know,
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's also hard on Zoom not to interrupt each other, and I apologize for that. I mean, the key here is, from what I can see, is you guys are the first people I've seen who started to bring this together. And, you know, we know as UX researchers that nothing is perfect right out of the gate. Like so the good and bad news about talking to each other is we're also very critical, but in a positive way, just to make it better. So that's what I think some of the questions, just to know. Because what I started to think is, okay, so the key is, though, if we start to use something like this, we do want to use all the same questions with all the same nomenclature, because otherwise we can't compare it easily. I'm just saying there's one thing.
Yep.
And then there's other issues. I saw one, I know this is sensitive, but since it was mentioned in the chat and you guys didn't mention it, I'll just go ahead and say, when you're looking at all the different dimensions, someone in the chat mentioned trauma, but I would say some other kind of mental health, learning issue, you know, like cognitive stuff, like there's all these other things. But trauma, I guess, particularly, I noticed it in the chat, but for me, it resonates as that might be something that you see more in certain populations than others. And like, how does that play out, you know, with a sensitivity or that kind of thing? So I don't know if you guys thought about that.
Trauma as far as like I'm sorry, because
as an index. Let's see. Actually, is Terrence still there? Because you could ask. I'm also happy to have you ask it. Is he off? Sorry, I don't see him. Okay.
One thing that I
okay.
I pinged
go ahead. Let me just let Terrence. Terrence, why don't you just ask it directly? Your question about trauma.
Yeah, I just given light of all situations, I when you were speaking, I just could not help but to think about that. So my question was, how does that fit into, your different components? It just seems like somehow, I'm not really clear about this, but it just seems like it has to be addressed. It's just a really necessary and vital component, because that's what you're dealing with in a lot of these instances with the different categories that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm having, you know, I'm still having a little bit of a hard time understanding, but for us, I think the fact that we, a lot of the work, so sort of stepping back, right? As we did this, I mean, some of my researchers are, trained in anthropology and sociology, and sort of all that sort of played into the work that we were doing and sort of selecting language, if you will. From a trauma perspective, that to me, just sort of like kind of pulling in. I'm currently on the board of a trauma sort of center for kids here in Miami, right? And I think about the training that the psychologists do there, and as far as like ensuring that the language, and this goes, I think, back to what Jonathan was talking about with language. I think as you pose these questions, you have to be mindful of how you set the language up, and that's why we probably iterated about it like I don't know how many times, and I still feel like to the point of like, do we have the exact language? I mean, a lot of this work was like looking at secondary research, looking at what other sociologists, anthropologists, how do we frame it? How do we pull it? But I think it's I think that it's, again, there's that sensitivity that you don't want to trigger the wrong sort of response from someone, right? You don't want to have someone feel that. Is that what we're trying to get at? I mean, I don't know if I
think so, but feel free to say it again, Terrence. It's challenging because it's a nuanced kind of an area as opposed to black and white, like, are you from this area or not? Or do you want to say more about it, Terrence, or do you feel like we hit it?
It's just like Baldwin's quote, of a lot of times, I mean, it's a very sensitive and it's a very, big issue today. So, just like the quote, I mean, it's something that, we have to face and we have to include, in my opinion, in all of our practices today. We have to consider trauma and the effects of trauma in some kind of way. I mean, I'm not a specialist in this area. I have experienced trauma personally. So as many people. So I just think that, just even if it's just trauma informed,
Yeah. Hi, Terrence. My name is Samantha. I'm from Key Lime Interactive, and I'm the resident in-house sociologist who helped build the Inclusivity Index. And all of these options were selected based on the best trauma-informed response that we could possibly provide. We relied heavily on sociology, anthropology, the theory of intersectionality, as well as census and US data in order to select these options. And as you notice, we try very hard to have folks be able to self-identify in order to avoid any potential trauma that could be put on by any labeling or stigma. But in instances where the option for self-labeling doesn't work, we've tried to make these options as inclusive and as trauma-informed as possible. Thank you.
And I think it's real helpful to know. I mean, I think what I'm noticing is, in this last year, I think we've all been traumatized in some way or another. And then that's on top of the trauma some of us already were living with. So, it's out there all the time. And I think as people who are focusing on the experience of humans, obviously it has to be integrated. And it sounds like you guys have. So I want to get on to another topic. I mean, I think we could talk about any of these for a long time, but the other question, and it could have been also Terrence, I'm not sure, but both of you guys are talking about how do we enforce this? How do we get this to like keep happening? I mean, obviously us talking about it, raising it in our projects with our clients, but what else? What other ideas? Like I want to send everyone out armed to do this. When they leave.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's been a choice, right? As a business, we've made it like, we don't really negotiate around this. Like there's really no, like, we will walk away if we find a client. We'll fire our client if we need to, because if we find ourselves in a situation where it's uncomfortable, right? But that's a choice that we've made, right? And for us, you have to be able to do that, right? You have to have someone who is going to be like the one that's going to walk away from like whatever it means to and risk. And I think that's important, right? So having someone who's a quote unquote, maybe the enforcer, or the one that like basically is not necessarily the enforcer, the one that is, able to like basically put themselves out there and really sort of be part. And it doesn't come lightly, right? There's a lot of criticism and why you and why not. And that's why part of why we did in the sort of the introduction, we wanted to make sure everyone understood, like, this isn't something that we're just saying because everybody else is saying and stuff like that. We wanted to make sure. So that I think having that and sort of drawing that with your audience is going to be very important as you do this, right? So your enforcer has to be well informed to be able to do that, right? Because it's not everybody. Eugene, I know you have a lot of thoughts around this, and we've had this conversation for bits. I'd love to hear his thoughts too.
Yeah, I don't know that it's always I'll speak more candidly, more freely here, right? Like, we're amongst friend and family. I talk to Anya and my team in a particular way, never just because I talk to them in that way, right? I don't know, I'm not communicating to the client in this way all the time, right? But for something that has worked for us in conversations internally, maybe even outside of like work settings, look, like Anya mentioned, if you care about this, then you care about this, and your actions back it up. So I don't have any problems calling people's bullshit if, they like to talk about it, but they don't do something about it. So very politely, in a very respectful way, it's about sort of getting to the point of letting them know, cool, you've made your decisions are valid, but let's be clear, a decision was made to exclude. Right. For better or for worse, it's your business, you can do what you want with it, right? Again, it's softer in that way, but I've tried to get that point across, right? And again, this is not about saying someone is bad, it's saying, hey, you made a choice, and it's cool making a choice, make that choice, but know that you made the choice. There's no space anymore to feign ignorance. I will not give you that opportunity. And so deal with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. I mean, I agree with you. And that was really helpful. So I have one very specific question, and I hope I pronounce your name right, Rajasai, about the, well, actually you had two. One was the mandatory 3 questions in the beginning, and if they were mandatory, like, were those first 3, are those mandatory? Yeah.
So,
okay.
No, they're not mandatory. They're mandatory from the standpoint of we're going to include them. For the participant, they're not mandatory for the participant to answer them. So if that's the question, I just wanted to make.
I'm not. Well, I guess if you have, go ahead and tell me if I pronounced your name wrong. Rajesh.
Oh yeah, it's Rajasi.
Okay.
And yeah, that was my question. If the questions were mandatory for the user to answer, so yeah, that answers.
Yeah, no, yeah, they're optional. But again, in like Samantha mentioned, right, we try to be as intentional, even in the language that we choose to use in the disclaimer. We really, 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 really want to collect this information. And so we're trying as best as we can, through digital and remote means to like be honest with people and say, hey, look, no, we really want this information because we want people to pay attention to it. You know what I mean? And if we don't have it, then we can't be on the front lines, parading, for things to change. And so, but it's not mandatory for anyone to include. And there's even options when we don't have the open-endeds for like prefer not to say.
Thanks.
And you had another question I was going to ask for you, which was, so do these categories and options work for participants who are not from the United States? Like, can we use this outside of the United States?
Yeah, I saw your response to that, Elizabeth. I think that the short answer is it should be tailored. So one of the things that we try to do is, again, we try to be forward thinking and think about, it's one, to collect the information, but what the hell are we going to do with the information that we collect? And so for better or for worse, at the moment, we are mindful of where we're going to index or where we're going to compare the information that we've collected to what database. And so I would say have that be part of your decision-making process. So where are you going to compare it, and, you know, try to align there, you know, where it makes the most sense.
Great. Thanks. I know, because we will, you know, this will go out to an international audience too. So my question, I know there are a few people from other countries. And so it's just a good, it's a good thing to think of.
Yeah, like, just full disclosure,
ahead.
we're getting ready to run a project, I believe, on the topic of DEI for a company in Canada. We will very likely modify some of the questions that we have so that it fits.
And we're part of like an alliance where we have 26 countries, and we've asked them to sort of play in as well. So part of, you know, UX Fellows, which is our, you know, when we run international, we typically run a lot of international research. So we leverage different partners through different countries, and you know, that they're also helping and sort of formulating some of these questions, like, you know, gender identity and things like that will still sort of fit, I think, for the most part, but you know, especially ethnicities and things like that have to be looked at differently.
Okay, I mean, you guys and audience, tell me, I think I hit most of the big things in the chat that hadn't already been asked. So we have.
I think there was one question that I saw, Elizabeth, and this isn't finished yet, but just as a visual example, I think someone asked, like, hey, how do we deal with the open-ended questions, right?
Okay.
We use lots of different tools to collect this information. We're trying to sort of fine tune it. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to collect the information, right? The anonymized information, and share it back, right? So we sort of build the database. But typically, right, this is the format. So even if it's open-ended, a lot of the different survey tools, SurveyMonkey and the like, will allow you to export the data sort of in this way. And so, you know, it's typically the question and then the actual word or text, right, associated with it. And so this works out really well, because it doesn't matter if the question was close-ended or open-ended, right? The data field is sort of treated the same way. And so that's how we've been we haven't really had to deal with it too much so far.
Okay, well, it's interesting. I'm getting real excited about this. Does anyone else have anything? We have
I'd love to ask a question. I mean, if I'd love to know if you've already been doing similar work at your company, wherever you work. I mean, I'd love to see you raise a hand, because if you have, like, I've had conversations with the team at Facebook, at Amazon, and at Google, and as well as a couple other companies about this. But like, if you have, you know, if you've been doing this work and you have a different, like, let's meld our minds and let's pull together and see if there's, you know, the thing we're doing right now is we're gonna, you know, open this up, but, you know, if you are interested in things like that, this isn't a sales pitch, by the way. I've been very clear.
No, it's fine. You're doing great.
I'm just like, I honestly, what it comes down to is we wanted to be more than just us, right? We wanted to be, you know, something that we pull together as a community. So if you have information, or you have things that you've done that might be relevant, we welcome that conversation. Happy to reach out.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I see the link in the chat, which is great. So people can get more information there. And I will be sending out, you know, a link to this video, and I can include the link that you got in the chat on that. I think it's important work. It's what we should all be doing all the time. And you guys presented so clearly, and your work is very, you know, crisp. I got it. So I appreciate that. And thank you to everybody else for coming. And I know I see people slowly dropping off. So I think we made good use of the lunch hour today. And unless anybody has any other questions, or if, no, just thank yous. But I don't know if you guys want to say anything else. Feel free.
Yes.
Join our mission. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to us and being part of this conversation with us today.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Let's keep including everybody, right?
Cool beans.
That's our mission. All right, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.